Hey guys, welcome back to Critical African Thinkers. As you know, this is a place where we examine everything under the microscope of logic to ascertain what is most factual and logically consistent. So today I'm going to be taking a little pivot from the conversations I've been having of recent, which usually is about the US Israel invasion or aggression against Iran. I'm going to be talking about something quite different. And I'm going to be covering a debate, a face off, an epic debate on reparations between two titans, two intellectual giants, two people that I respect a lot. Now, they may have their flaws, they would have their own shortcomings intellectually, but for the most part, these men are solid men in their own right. They're insightful, they're articulate, they're smart, they know their stuff. So there was a debate years ago between Professor Glenn Loury and Christopher Hitchens on the subject of reparations. Now, if you know Glenn Loury is very big on, you know, identity politics, mostly from the right. So obviously you would know that he would be against the notion that reparations should be paid. I have earlier covered this debate in my much more right-wing days, and I agreed vehemently with Professor Lowry. But I know that at this point in time, my views on reparations has been updated based on new understanding that I've come to acquire. So I decided to revisit this debate again to see who makes more sense and to just give my thoughts on the points that they are making to see, okay, who makes more sense in this debate on reparations between Professor Lowry and Christopher Hitchens. So I'm going to share my screen and then we'll get right into it. So let's go.
Thank you. I rise to address the question, should the U.S. pay reparations for slavery? I'm going to argue in the negative on that question. I take no pleasure in doing so. Would that I would be somewhere else tonight than here before you arguing the negative of this question. I am not without sympathy for the arguments that just have been presented. I mean, how could it be otherwise? I am a descendant of slaves. I recognize that we have a past that needs to be reckoned with. But the payment of reparations to African Americans for the wrongs of that past is the wrong way to reckon with it.
Okay, good. So you recognize that there's a past that needs to be reckoned with. And I would really love to hear Professor Lowry outline how that can happen, how that past can be reckoned with without reparations.
I say that for three reasons. It's bad social ethics. Bad social ethics. It is bad racial politics. Bad racial politics. And it averts our attention from the most profound issues with which, if we do not reckon, we're never going to put that past behind us. Now, let's deal with the social ethics. The tort law model that is implicit in the reparations claim, Party A injures Party B sues Party A pays Party B, is the wrong model for thinking about this problem. If I was talking about somebody who carelessly let their automobile roll down the garage driveway and run into the automobile of someone else, then we're talking let's get paid. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the desecration of the most important ideals that this country has advanced. I'm talking about a nation founded on the notion that all men are created equal and endowed, so forth and so on, that nevertheless countenance the institution of traffic in human chattel. That is a monumental crime, the magnitude of which is diminished into something picayune by saying that it's about money. It is not about money. What it's about is whether or not we are going to rise and be the people whom we have always proclaimed ourselves to be.
So, beautiful speech by Professor Lowry, articulate as always. But The thing is, why is reparations always framed in terms of money? Why is it always seem as though it has to be in the form of monetary payments? Not that there is anything wrong with monetary payments. I'm going to give reasons why I don't think monetary payments itself is they're bad. I mean, there've been other cases where reparations have been paid and they've been useful. I will outline some of those cases, including the reparations that West Germany paid to Israel, to Jews, to survivors of the Holocaust. And there's so many other examples, and we can see, and I have some notes here, and we see how that reparation actually helped those people. So there are different modes of deployment of reparations. They can be direct payments. There's nothing wrong with that. They can be trust funds and endowments, and this creates sustainable funding streams for education and community development. There can be asset building programs, down payments for grants, small businesses, loans, and land redistribution, which addresses wealth gaps more structurally. There could be institutional investments, funding for hospitals, schools, infrastructure, which generates long term growth. An example, the German reparation to Israel. And there could be a hybrid model which combines cash payments with targeted programs. And they appear to be most effective for both justice and developmental goals. So, why is Professor Loury framing it solely in terms of monetary terms? Why is he unable to conceive of other ways in which reparations can be paid? I think this is very narrow, and I believe that he's taking this approach, or people who are against reparations, they usually take this approach, this narrow approach, so that they have a much more defensible position to say, oh, you think it's about money, money can't really solve problems. But I take issues with this line of reasoning.
And let me tell you, folks, you cannot put a price tag on that.
Of course not. You cannot put a price tag on what African Americans went through. It's not possible. You also cannot put a price tag on 6 million Jews murdered by the Nazi regime. But that did not stop them from paying reparations. Now, I'm going to read, I'm just going to read how reparations was paid to Israel and what what it did, right? Post World War II reparations to Jewish victims. The harm addressed. The Holocaust resulted in the systematic murder of 6 million Jews and the confiscation of property, businesses, and assets across Europe. Survivors were left destitute, often without family networks or means of livelihood. Reparations paid. West Germany paid $7 billion to Israel in 1952. This is the 1952 Luxembourg Agreement. Individual compensation totally approximately $89 billion over time. Additional payments through the Conference on Jewish Material Claims against Germany. And the modes of deployment includes direct payments to survivors and their heirs, bulk payments to the Israeli state. The Israeli state did not even exist when this atrocity took place, but Germany still paid, to the Israeli state, funding for social services and community rebuilding, investment in industrial and agricultural development in Israel. And this is the economic impact. The reparations played a pivotal role in Israel's early economic development. Between 1953 to 1963, German reparations accounted for about 15% of Israel's total imports and financed nearly half of its investment in electrical equipment, railways, and shipping. This capital injection helped transform Israel from an agrarian society to an industrial economy. So we could also make the argument that it is insulting to make payments for 6 million Jewish lives lost. But it is practical. That payment is practical. It cannot undo the harm done, but it is a form of redress. If you cause the accident of someone, if maybe there's an accident, there's negligence that results in someone having an injury, and then there is a court case where the person has to be paid, the damages, does it really restore the person back to the way they were? Not necessarily, but this is a form of compensation. Would you say it's an insult to that person that they are being compensated for a harm done to them? I really don't understand that logic.
The African American family, more than 60% of black children are born out of wedlock. That has got something to do with the fact that men and women could be ripped from the moorings of their familial bond and sold away as if they were property, as if they were horses, under the institution of slavery. That's not a small thing. It's a big thing. You want me to monetize that? $10,000 a head times 30 million people, that's $300 billion, and then we're done with it? No, not on my watch.
Back to the point I was making, no one is asking you to monetize that pain because it literally cannot be monetized. It is not monetizable. Oh, so does it mean that because the Germans paid reparations to the Israelis that they're all good, everything is all fair and square, that Germany holds no responsibility, Germany feels no responsibility towards what was done to Jewish people during the Holocaust? I mean, have you been to German society? Have you seen the way they treat, that Holocaust? The way they teach it in their schools so that people remember what Germany did and so that it doesn't occur again. It is not a trivial matter. They've made reparations, but it doesn't absolve them. It doesn't mean all good. We've made the reparations, we've made the payment, so all good. That's not how it works. So this is a very weird framing from Professor Loury.
So, you're a YouTuber. You spend days scripting, weeks filming and editing. You finally upload.
It's serious business, as my erstwhile worthy opponent has said. It is serious business, too serious to be put down on somebody's paycheck. It's bad social ethics. Us versus them. They got hurt, we're going to pay them. This is not about black people and white people, human beings. This is about human beings. This is about America.
This second framing, BS. Because it is not about white people and black people. It is about a state. It's about a country and black people. Disingenuous people like Professor Loury on this issue would make it seem as though it is white people who are paying reparations. I mean, come on, many white people, the ancestors of many white people currently in America were not even in America when these things happened. So it can't be them. It is the US government that is responsible. The US government itself is what is responsible for that harm done to African Americans, to a people that are recognizable. So it is the responsibility of the US government to make good. It is the responsibility of the US. So this framing of white people paying black, come on. How? It's BS. And anybody who takes their time to just think it through knows that it's BS. It is, this framing is disingenuous. It is making it seem as though white people are being required to make payments to black people. No. This was an institution that was put in place and supported by the US government, an entity that still exists till today. The US government is it's a continuum. If the US government has a debt to pay to a country, maybe that's they borrowed some monies in the 1700s from a certain country. Do you think as at this point in time they have no responsibility anymore to pay back that debt? Because it's not the current government that made that borrowing. No. The government is continuous. So this framing, it makes no sense.
I don't want a contested, legalized, us-them reduction of this problem. I want us to understand that the stakes here are stakes for everybody. We're all on the same side.
No. What Professor Loury is doing here is trying to be sensitive to white feelings. And I really have no idea why any white person will have any issue with this, or why any white person would feel attacked or feel guilty about slavery. You weren't the one who did it. So why do you feel attacked? Why do you feel guilty for it? Even if it was your ancestors that did it, of which it wasn't the ancestors of many white people in America today, why do you feel personally responsible? It is not you, it is the state. So this framing makes no sense. Glenn Loury is catering to the feelings of the invalid feelings, I would say, of white people. And that's why he's saying it is bad social ethics. Facts don't care about your feelings, according to Ben Shapiro. The fact of the matter is, wrong was done to a group of people, and reparations are a way of addressing certain wrong. Does that mean that it can make them whole? Does that mean that it can pay for everything, all the damage done? No, it doesn't mean any of that. Does that mean that all the problems in African American society are going to be solved instantaneously? No. Does that mean that the US government have no more responsibility to citizens, to African Americans after the payment of reparations? No, it doesn't mean any of those things. So what the hell is he talking about?
It's bad social ethics. It is bad racial politics. It is
bad racial politics because you are racializing it. Can you look at the reparations paid by Germany to Israel and say it's bad racial politics? How exactly is it bad racial politics? It just happened to be, that most of the people who perpetrated it were of a different racial group to the victims. But how is it bad racial politics? It happened. Do you want to ignore history because of modern day sensibilities? It's however beautiful and flowery and eloquent Professor Loury's arguments are, they really don't stand. They don't make sense.
Racial politics. I am so tired of the politics of symbolism substituting for a substantive building of progressive coalitions in African American political experience that I did not know what to do.
So you think that reparations is a politics of symbolism? No, it would be something very substantive. It's not. It's just a symbolic gesture. It is a substantive gesture. And the reason why you've been seeing all these symbolic gestures is because what needs to be addressed hasn't been addressed.
The nation is moving forward. We are a forward-looking people. 30 million immigrants come to our shores since 1965. They and their children are a part of the national story, too. How can we address the problems that continue to plague us, that derive from this outrageous history, without real political coalitions prepared to enact into law the myriad statutes that will be necessary with respect to healthcare, with respect to education, with respect to housing, with respect to doing something about the blight of our inner cities? How are those laws actually going to be passed unless majorities can be formed that are prepared to affirm them?
So Loury is essentially saying that there is no political will to do this, that it will offend people's sensibilities, that there will not be a coalition. You won't get a coalition. That there lies the problem. There lies the problem. Why should politicians have an issue with this program that's going to help fellow Americans? Why should they have issues with it? And you're essentially saying that something that is productive or substantive should not be pursued because some people are going to oppose it, because some people are going to be offended by it. You're not even trying to make a case for it to say, this is the reason why you should follow this route. But you're saying the mere fact that they're going to be offended by it is enough for us to just abandon it.
Majorities need to be given a narrative, a story, an account of what we are about. And I fear that the reparations construction is woefully inadequate to provide such an account. We need a common narrative of national obligation. That's the only way that Black education is going to improve. That's the only way that the quality of life for poor Black children in inner cities is going to be made better.
So, in my opinion, these are not mutually exclusive things. It doesn't mean that once reparations are done, then other policies cannot be pursued. Like it's not either. It's not this or that. These things can be in place simultaneously. Okay, so reparations hasn't been paid. Have the other issues, if reparations is not sufficient to address the issues facing the African American community, reparations hasn't been paid. Have those issues been addressed? Have they been addressed? The answer is no. So what the hell are you talking about? These things can exist simultaneously. It is not mutually exclusive.
Common narrative onto which at least 51% of the electorate is prepared to sign about national obligation. You cannot get there from here with a reparations argument. It's bad politics. It is a diversion from the real issues. As I said, we need political coalition. As I have said, we need to garner the support of new Americans who simply can't buy into this old argument as theirs.
What does the starvation in Gaza look like right now? Here's the ugly truth for thousands of families in Gaza right now.
But most importantly, we need to recognize that even if African Americans were to prevail in the reparations claim, even if we were to get paid, even if we were to get the check, we could still lose. Consider
So essentially, this is a fear of failure. This is what Professor Loury is unwittingly arguing for, is that he suspects African Americans will fail. And he doesn't want to let go of that, the ability to say our failure is as a result of what was done to us. Because once the reparations have been paid, you have no excuse anymore. So he wants that opening to still be there, so that if we fail, if we keep failing, we can always say, well, this was what happened to us. The fear of failure. This is not the most productive way to go about something like this. So what? If African Americans fail after reparations are paid? Reparations aren't a guarantee of anything. It's a debt owed. It's not a guarantee of anything. It's redress. It's a moral recompense. And it doesn't take away the obligations that the state has to African Americans as citizens of the US.
American who sits in the suburbs somewhere, who is approached with the problems of 1.2 million Black young men under lock and key on a given day, and on the day after reparations checks have gone out saying, oh yeah, well, you people have been paid. Consider the rural American resident who is approached with the problem of life expectancy of African Americans 10 years shorter than that of white Americans, for all manner of reasons having to do both with the way in which healthcare is delivered and the general factors of our society that affect the quality of life of people of color. And that person says, yes, interesting point, but you know what? You Negroes have been paid.
This is such a cynical view of things. So if there is disparity in health outcomes due to structural factors and issues, just because reparations have been paid, you're not going to attend to those structural issues. You're going to just say, well, you people have been paid. Does it even make sense? How does it compute in his head to say all that? If there is mass incarceration of African Americans, how does reparation address that? How? What's the relationship? What's the correlation?
Consider the person, perhaps a recent citizen to the country, who is informed about the fact that African-American 17-year-olds in this country read and compute at the level of white American 13-year-olds, a 4-year gap in educational accomplishment by the time they're 17. And that person says, it's an interesting point, but you know what? Those checks just went out.
So how are those checks going to help the educational improvement of this child? How does the payment of those checks exclude helping the African American child to perform optimally educationally? Now, many of the likes of Professor Loury will say this is culture, it's a cultural problem. So if it is culture, obviously money isn't going to change the culture. So it therefore means that on the one hand, you could be taking approaches to change the culture of African Americans if you think that's the problem, on the one hand, and the reparations as well. So these things can work hand in hand. In fact, they are going to be complementary. They are not contradictory. They are not exclusive of one another. It's not one or the other. Both can exist at the same time. So it makes no sense.
People have been paid. What I'm saying to you, ladies and gentlemen, and the reason that I urge you to support me, is that precisely because this is a serious matter.
Imagine, Jewish people commemorating the Holocaust and being told, why are you doing that? You people have been paid. How does it sound? Now, apart from the fact that, there are other examples of people who were also paid reparations. Even in the US, the Japanese, for example, were paid reparations. This is the harm address was during World War II. Approximately 120,000 Japanese Americans were forcibly relocated to internment camps, losing homes, businesses, and personal property. Reparations paid includes $1.6 billion total under the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, $20,000 per surviving internee. Right. Modes of deployment: direct tax-free payment to survivors, educational fund for descendants, public memorials, and historical preservation. So if the Japanese, who relative to African Americans are a relatively new migrant population to the US, if they could get reparations for something that was done within a very short span of time to them, and not just to them, to their descendants, if that could happen, then why is it inconceivable that the people who have been most harmed by the US state, why is it inconceivable that reparations should be paid for them? I mean, why?
Precisely because the possibility that our country...
Now that those reparations was paid to those Japanese people, does it mean that the US has no obligations whatsoever to its Japanese citizens? That if the Japanese citizens today are struggling, that the US government cannot look for policies, look for ways to help them? You've been paid. That's all. You're done. Just go. Deal with your issues.
Will not live up to its most cherished ideals is very real. Precisely because a history of oppression, degradation, racism has left very real consequences in its train. Precisely because there are millions of people whose lives are yet to be blessed with the riches and the potentiality that this society holds so dear. For precisely that reason, we should not go down the reparations road. Because you know what? As long as it's possible to put a color on those faces of despair that look up at us from the bottom rungs of American society, the debt will be outstanding. Let us not close the door on our national obligation the easy way. Let us not buy ourselves out of this problem with 1 year's worth of military budget expenditures.
So you see what he's saying. He thinks that reparations is in effect buying away obligation. So once that is done, the US government doesn't have an obligation to its people anymore. How does it make any sense? How does it make sense? This is exactly what I was just saying. It thinks that once reparations are paid, that the US government has no obligations anymore to African Americans. Is that how societies work? Is that how things function?
Let us not let ourselves off the hook by converting what is a sacred civic obligation, as yet unmet, into the profane currency of greenbacks.
So how do you meet that civic obligation? How exactly? He hasn't articulated how that can be met. Let us not do this. Let us not do that. Okay, there is an obligation. You have said there is a civic obligation. How exactly should it be done?
Let's be serious about dealing with our past. Let's not talk about reparations. Let's talk about justice, and let's mean it. Thank you.
Jesus warned about fake believers. Most people think believing in Jesus automatically means you're saved.
Right. Reparations is justice.
The final debater on the affirmative side is Christopher Hitchens.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, I hope I can say. Comrades and friends, I might go so far. I should say first, I think it's very impressive and rather encouraging that so many people would come out on such a beautiful evening to discuss and debate such a serious and pressing subject. I should add, though, that as a teacher, I insist that anyone who has been told by the professor that they have to be here leaves now. I will not speak to captive audiences. That's good then. All right. Further to the principles of free inquiry and open debate that go up to make a great university, my view is and will always be that it matters not what you think. Anyone can have thoughts. Many people content themselves with feelings. It matters how you think. So since the case has been so well phrased by my predecessor speakers, I thought I might just begin by a thought experiment, by an argument from analogy of a case I once put myself in another context. I wrote a book saying that the British Museum should return to Athens the chunks of the sculpture of the Parthenon, sometimes called the Elgin marbles, always pronounced wrongly in this country. It was Lord Elgin, in fact, hard G, that they had annexed in the 18th century. They didn't make any sense that the sculpture should be separated. It was carved as a unity, that the original crime was the desecration of a great historic culture and a great historic temple, a gross insult to an entire culture and society, the Greeks, the amputation of an organic and aesthetic whole, a theft, a rape, a taking, perpetrated by the strong upon the weak. By the way, this was all done at the same time as the British fleet, Her Majesty's fleet, was also the military guarantor of the slave trade, of the triangular trade of the Atlantic and the Middle Passage. Now, the points I made on this, how justice could be done, how reparation could be made, how a wrong once inflicted could be restored, made good, I could well buttress by fact and could do so now if I was challenged. Additionally, I suppose most importantly, I said that while not every crime committed in the high days of empire and war and plunder could be repaired, this one could. Restitution could be made. That sculpture had been wrenched from its context. It had been broken up. It had been segregated. It had been injured. It had been damaged in the process. Not everything could be put right, but most of it could. It could be reunited. And the scars and the missing fragments and the injuries would be just part of that great narrative once the healing, once the reunification had been more or less accomplished. Now, I was fascinated. This is a simple case, as I hope you can see. I was very impressed by the torrent of bad faith in which I was immediately doused. By their arguments, ladies and gentlemen, you may know them. When people begin to introduce the irrelevant and the non sequitur and the generalization, you know you're onto something. For example, people say, do you mean that every artifact in every museum in Europe should immediately be returned to its country of origin? I think you...
Exactly. You're making a case for something. Someone is saying, do you mean they'll just bring an extreme, a very wide, broad generalization. So you mean to say that every artifact needs to be, every artifact needs to be returned. If you say, well, no, then they will ask you why you're making exceptions. That's their shtick. Instead of addressing the issues on ground, they're going to make it as broad as possible to try to detract away from the point that you're trying to make. And Hitchens is just, he's using this analogy to give you an example of, how people would make nonsense arguments against reparations.
You can tell that that was not what I was saying.
Exactly.
But could I get anyone to get off that song? I don't think I could. Do you see the analogy, perhaps, to what we're meant to discuss this evening? I think perhaps you might. There's a constant whine and drone, what I call a white whine, when this subject comes up. People say, what, you mean we'd have to go back and help the Comanches get there? You know how it goes.
Exactly. It's correct. White wine. It is. It is. And this is what Professor Loury was avoiding, the white wine, catering to the feelings of white people.
A rather nasty combination, actually, of self-pity and self-hatred among white Americans that deserves to be, I think, treated with great scorn. I was told, well...
Hitchens tells it like it is.
Well, what about the Babylonians? I said, well, the Babylonians are not going to come and make a claim. The stuff from Babylon in the British Museum is probably best off where it is. The Rosetta Stone and the pharaonic material there is probably best off where it is. More people will see it. And there are no pharaonic Egyptians to press a claim either. Why are you...
So, if there are people who can press a claim and they have legitimate, then you should consider their claim. You cannot say because there are some other people who cannot press a claim to something, therefore that should be the standard. They tell you, so do you mean that we're going to return artifacts to Babylon? There are no Babylonians pressing any claim. But there are African Americans who are here, they're pressing a claim, but you're dismissing it based on some nonsense criteria.
Mentioning this when there's a real case before you that could be made, and a real injustice that could be repaired. I think I know why. I think I feel the itchings and prickings of a bad conscience behind this kind and mode of argument. Then it was said, well, didn't the great noble Lord Elgin actually sort of rescue the sculpture by stealing it and using it first to decorate his private home and then to make a fortune by selling it? Wouldn't it have, maybe it would have been worse off if it had stayed where it was? Well, some of the sculpture that stayed in Athens was very badly treated and has been badly knocked about. And I heard it said this year in an argument about the Confederate flag, no, last year, excuse me, in an argument about the Confederate battle flag in Carolina, I heard it openly said by a spokesman for the Confederacy of our present day, one of whom is now our Attorney General. But not that he said this, but the partisans of his said this. He said, well, how would those Africans have got along if we just left them in West Africa? Didn't we do them a favor? We made them Americans, didn't we? We brought...
This is the kind of argument that they're making. This is, PragerU has videos literally making this nonsense argument. That you did them a favor by making them Americans. Did they beg you to make them Americans? At the horrors that they went through, did they ask you? Was any of that consensual?
Brought them here. Do they wish they had not been...
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the third edition of the Africa Technology Expo.
So what is...
removed. Now, this argument also, I think, shows a very bad conscience. Indeed, I'm going to come back to this argument, by the way. Bear it in mind. Bear in mind what the underlay of this discussion really is. But always notice and pay attention when people appear to be changing the subject and distracting or trying to redirect your attention to some theoretical or cosmic or abstract injustice that can't be rectified. That's beyond
exactly. And he hits the nail on the head. That was exactly what Professor Loury was doing. He was creating a theoretical scenario of some, something that can never be rectified. Oh, this is such a big deal. Do not insult me by monetizing it. If you want to be insulted, facts don't care about your feelings. If you don't want the reparations money, good and fine. Don't take it. And it doesn't even always have to be in form of money.
the reach of justice that's past our power to heal or to alter. In other words, beware when someone tries to make the best the enemy of the good. This is the charge I'm going to make against the good Professor Loury, whose opening speech I thought was superb.
Yep. Professor Loury was making the best the enemy of the good. That was his whole argument. Well, we can't get the best, so we shouldn't even try. That was his whole argument. And Hitchens is summarizing it succinctly and perfectly.
Beware of making the best the enemy of the good. That's where I'll turn to our present case. Review it in the same way. Conduct, if you will, the same thought experiment. Was there an original traceable offense? Was there a taking, a theft, a rape, a dispossession, a confiscation? There isn't a thinking person who can say no to that. The evidence is very clear, and it mounts with every chapter of historical inquiry. Did it consist of, as I say, a confiscation? Can it therefore be made good? If not all of it can be made good, can some of it be made good?
Good point. Of course, not all of it can be made good, but some of it can be made good. And for the fact that not all of it can be made good is not an argument against making some of it good. Loury was essentially making the argument that if all of it cannot be made good, then nothing should be done.
Can any of it be repaired? Don't make the best the enemy of the good. Is there anything to be rescued from this terrible story? Is there anything that can be done about it once it's been recognized? We cannot possibly undo. I actually don't think we even dare think of the scope of what it would take to imagine undoing the damage done to Africa, especially to West Africa, by the period of colonization, colonial division, plunder, slavery, and rape. We can't undo the enforced underdevelopment of Africa, though we are, you may notice, compelled to keep trying to do that on other fronts all the time and to deal with the consequences of the amputation and dismemberment of Africa in that period. And who would say we shouldn't do that, little enough as it is? Who would say it isn't our responsibility to do that in Africa now as well? I hope none of you would. We can't make up for the Middle Passage, for the uncounted millions of people who were captured and raped and tortured before they even made it across the Atlantic to be other people's property. We can't undo that, but we can refuse, we can decline to forget it. If you really want to think about all the things that can't be redeemed, you'll be in some danger, I think, of weeping. But in my hometown of Washington, D.C., there's hardly one official brick piled on another that wasn't piled there by unpaid labor under the whip. And that dead labor becomes dead capital and dead souls, dead money, and it's piled actually in the Treasury Department and the federal financial system, who took that free labor and those dead souls and turned it into capital, and it's back pay, and it's owed, and it's overdue. Now, Professor Loury, in his very indignant nobility, said...
I like that word, indignant nobility. That's what he does. That's his whole shtick.
That he would repudiate this cash. He'd say, keep your money. You can't buy me like that. I respect him very much for it. I hope he would say that. I would support him in saying it if he would. He can only say it for himself, it seems to me.
Exactly.
He misses two opportunities, and I'll have to condense my remarks here. He misses the chance, a very important chance. He doesn't want us to miseducate African Americans to feel dependent, to feel mendicant, to feel entitled. And I see why he says so. He's missing the chance to remind white society of what it does not know. He's missing a chance to challenge the complacency and the historical nullity of white society that says we don't owe anyone anything. How dare these people bring all this stuff up? It's it was too long ago. So when he says keep your damn money, I'm all the way with him, but he can't say keep your damn history, and let's turn that back too. This is America. The right to entitlement, to inheritance, to a share in the common treasury is what defines that. If it has to be fought for at law, so much the worse. But there's no alternative but to fight over it. And if I've done nothing else, I'm sure now every one of you knows that Lord Elgin is pronounced with a hard G. Thank you.
Well summed, I would say, by Hitchens. Even though his points were not as clearly stated as Professor Loury, who is just an absolutely brilliant man when it comes to words, but his points made more sense. It had more substance to it than the arguments that Loury was making. So let's continue and see the rebuttal that Loury brings in.
Well, here we are at the end of this interesting and important discussion. I'm going to urge you to move to your right when the time comes and to vote the negative on this question. Now, we heard some arguments. We heard some red herrings, and we heard some serious arguments. I'm going to ignore the red herrings. I'm going to ignore this business about some people say blacks might have been better off if they'd been left in West Africa. I'm going to ignore all that because nobody here is arguing anything like that.
No, you can't ignore that because there are people on your side arguing for something like that. So you cannot dismiss it. It is part of the ether of arguments that is being made on this matter. You can't dismiss it, right? Because Loury knows that's the position he cannot defend, he's trying to make light of it.
What will I do with this old AC in my new house?
Madam, you can exchange it for a brand new.
But I do want to deal with some of the more serious arguments. Mr. Hitchens suggests that I'm making the best the enemy of the good here.
Yeah, that's exactly what you were doing.
The good is checks could be gotten. The best is all of Loury's flowery talk about a great nation coming to realize in its practice the true meaning of its creed. That is not what I am doing at all, ladies and gentlemen. I'm engaging in hard-headed political analysis about what is the good and how can it be achieved. All right?
Okay, so I'd like to hear what that good is and how it can be achieved, according to Professor Loury.
Checks coming in the mail to some people.
And then we're back to this again. It doesn't have to be checks. It can be checks. I have no problem with it being checks. But it certainly doesn't have. Why is he so fixated on it being just money? Is he unable to conceive of other ways in which reparations can be paid? No, he's not a stupid person, but he knows that this is the most defensible position he can have. So he has to reduce it to monetary terms to make it seem vain, to make it seem bad. But even the slave masters were paid reparations for the loss of their property. The British slave owners were paid reparations. I'll get that in a little while. I'll read it.
People is a good thing for those people. I'm not denying that. But there are other things that are good things too. The construction of a progressive politics in the country that can address the underlying structural problems that leave those people and others who happen not to be black disadvantaged, that's a good thing. Am I to understand that that's a unachievable ideal in American public life? That it's unimaginable that we would ever become a nation in which we understand ourselves to all be in this together? in which we understand that 3 strikes and you're out, throw them away, throw them in jail and throw the key away. Communities in which 30 or 40% of the prime age young men are in and out of prison. Understanding that is a bad thing, is a blight on our national conscience, is something that we ought not to tolerate. Am I to understand that that's unachievable? That's some ideal that's out there that can never be gotten? I think not. I think not. I'm not making the best the enemy of the good here. I'm arguing about what's the good. The race question continues to bedevil us.
See, you cannot avoid the race question because the problem was a racial problem. It's like ignoring history. Yes, it is uncomfortable. I'd rather there not be a conversation on race. I'd rather there not be anything that is racialized. But this is the reality on the ground. This is the reality. So trying to shy away from it because you think race is such a touchy subject is simply just ignoring reality. It is simply ignoring reality. Is as problematic as ignoring the differences between men and women in certain conversations. So paradoxically, Loury is taking a very woke stance.
It's not just a matter of whether or not somebody in theory owes something. It's a matter of how we're going to work it out. The facts on the ground are constantly changing. It is not a small thing that 30 million new Americans have come to our shores since 1965.
The relevance of that disinformation, I can't seem to find the relevance of the fact that 30 million new Americans have come to the shores. What's the relevance to the reparations debate? He's just grasping for straws.
That's a big thing. What is the story of our country going to be in the 21st century?
What is the story of the country in the 19th century, in the 20th century? You want to forget about the story? Those stories, they're not relevant. They're not a part of American history. You want to ignore them for a much more, much more friendly story in the future. That's what this is about. Okay.
Is it about white wine? Or will it become about black people whining yet again about what they haven't gotten, about what somebody owes them?
So you think you have a problem with black wine, but you don't have a problem with white wine. Okay. Interesting. You think black people are just whining unnecessarily. But when the conversation comes up and you get white people whining as though they accusing fingers, pointing at them individually as a person, you think they're justified to whine in that manner. Okay. The double standards are very, very clear.
I desperately wanted not to become that second thing.
Yeah, but the first thing, do you care to address it being the first thing at the moment? Do you care to address that?
I'm not saying that noble, decent people who seek justice by asking for reparations are whiners and complainers. But I am saying this, there's the very real possibility that their efforts will persuade too many Americans that that's the way they need to think about black people. That would...
Who cares? I mean, who gives a shit? This is the respectability politics of Glenn Loury. What would people think? Oh, they'll think that we are whining. Oh, they'll think that we are... See how he did not address the white wine part. He definitely... He avoided that one. No, but black wine is a problem. The people who actually have a legitimate case, it's a problem. Their call for redress is seen as whining by one of their own.
Be a very bad thing.
YouTube creators, if no one clicks your video, nothing else matters. Not your content, not your script, not your
Mr. Hitchens invites us to consider an analogy. He asks us to think about what the British Museum ought to do relative to certain important artistic pieces that were taken away by bad armies from Athens. I'm inclined to agree with him. But I'm not talking about the moral relations between two nations or two peoples played out over centuries. I'm talking about the construction of political relations and national conscience within this nation. Right here.
What the hell does that mean? What does it mean? What this statement that Larry just said, what does it mean?
Here, right now. The analogy fails.
And what does it have to do with anything or reparations?
Fails because what we Americans decide that we are about is very much in the balance here. The us-them dichotomy that I want to avoid is what we're headed for if we frame this question in terms of reparations.
It is not a us versus them. If someone is injured by a party, let's even say it's a us versus them. So what? The problem was us versus them to begin with. Then the solution should be us versus them. I'm not saying that is what it is, but supposing it is, so what?
How can it be otherwise? You put the matter as if somebody is owed something, somebody's supposed to be paid. We're invited, and you see the students in the audience saying so. What do white people owe? What have black people been, how have black people been injured, and so forth and so on? When we put
it is not white people owing, it is the country owing. Black Americans are part of that country too. So it is not white people owing, it is the US owing.
In that way, we invite ourselves to split the polity. But it's not beyond our reach. It's not beyond our grasp. It's not outside the realm of political possibility that we might go forward as one people, one national enterprise, striving to achieve a common good, which is the obliteration of this blight from our history as it continues to manifest itself in our contemporary life.
You cannot erase history, Mr. Loury. Despite your best efforts to want to do that, you cannot. You cannot erase the impact of history. You can only address them to try and give redress, which you are trying to deny because you want to paint a fantastical history for the US, something that doesn't exist.
That's achievable. We can get there. The question you ought to be asking yourselves is, what path is going to get us there? Checks in the mail, or a progressive politics built around some idea about what it is that we owe to each other and what a decent society would look like? I say the latter. Ask yourself whether or not the reparations debate frames the question in a way that allows the development of a politics of decency in our society, a politics in which we look at the inner cities and we say, oh my God, how can that be happening here? A politics in which we say about those 1.2 million African-American young men who are locked up today, right now as I speak, not what manner of people are they, but what manner of people are we that we accept that kind of degradation in our midst? How are we going to get that kind of politics? How are we going to actually achieve it?
So do you think that if you pay reparations, that you can't actually do that? You can't address those things, that you cannot put things in place to address those things? Oh, man.
Courts of law with litigants claiming about injuries done on the basis of race? I think not.
But the injury was done on the basis of race, so why can't the claims be made on the basis of race?
I am accused of indignant nobility. Well,
yeah, true. Very, very spot on. And Larry hasn't changed up until this moment. He's still that very, and that was one of the things that actually drew me to him in the first place when I was very right-wing. I liked his indignant nobility, but now I'm just put off by it.
Take the nobility part, and I'll admit to a small amount of indignation. Yeah, a small amount of indignation. But not because I don't want to be sullied by having a check come in the name of Glenn Loury. That's not what this is about.
That's what it is about.
No, I'm not here trying to speak on behalf of all Black people. I don't want to check, therefore they shouldn't get it. I'm here trying to speak on behalf of all Americans. Let us consider how best ought we to think about the problem. What's the problem? How to think about it. What's the problem? How should we think about it? Okay.
What exactly is the problem? You are making generalizations. We're not talking about the problem of America as a whole. We're talking about a very specific problem. The problem of slavery, which you so deftly do not want to address by making it about the problem of America in general. There are different facets of problem. There are different aspects of problem in America. You can have targeted solutions to those problems. But no, he wants to ignore this problem because it is inconvenient. It is going to make white people feel somehow uncomfortable. You know, I got started with this channel, the debates I had with a certain African American. I watched his video. He said where he called Glenn Loury is a coon, and I obviously was incensed by that. I was indignant by that. How could you say the venerable Glenn Loury is a coon? So I attacked him on his comment section that the only reason why people are even watching your videos is because you mentioned Glenn Loury and so on and so forth. So he challenged me to a debate. And then that was the first debate we had on this channel. And for months and probably years, 2 years after that, I was a very ardent supporter of Glenn Loury, covered many of his content. The best performing video that I've ever had on this channel was covering Glenn Loury's video calling Ibrahim X. Kendi a lightweight. It's still on this channel. You can find it there. That's my best performing video. So yes, I've been where he is at now, but I've evolved past all that because I have a better understanding of things. But Glenn Loury is stuck in his ways. He's stuck in his ways in this very particular way. It is inconvenient for him. It is inconvenient. So facts don't care about your feelings. I really don't care about anybody's feelings. I mean, you shouldn't be incensed by something like this. You're a white person who is feeling attacked by this. I've got to ask you, what the hell is wrong with you? Why do you feel personally attacked or responsible for this? You didn't do it. So there has to be something fundamentally wrong with you for you to take it personal, for you to be inconvenienced by this. And those are the people that Glenn Loury is catering to. Is catering to the feelings of white whiners. I don't care about your feelings, white, black, yellow. I really don't give a shit. I only care about the arguments. I only care about the facts as they are being presented.
The problem is that the dark shadow of a morally problematic past continues to cast itself over the lives of too many Americans. That's the problem. If those consequences were not here, if those poverty rates weren't what they were, if the districts that are the worst places to live in this country did not tend to be black and brown, if the prisons were not overflowing with black people, if the welfare rolls weren't the color that they are, we wouldn't be talking about this. So the problem is
that's not true. That is not true. Of course, the history of the United States contributed to why those things are the way they are. But it is not necessarily true that that's the reason why we're talking about reparations. But even if it were, then deal with it. That is the cause. Slavery, Jim Crow, it's part of why these things are the way they are. So why can't you address it? Why are you trying to ignore history?
History has a present-day consequence. What is the solution to that problem? Checks in the mail are not the solution. They are a good thing for as long as they last. No, I don't presume paternalism over those people who might get those checks. I don't say that they would waste their money. What I say is this is an open-ended problem here. There aren't any checks big enough to cover it. It is said that we mustn't allow the nation to forget what has happened. It has been said that the issue is an insufficient memory in the white American population about what the past had been. Precisely, I agree with that. Again, if that's the problem, what's the solution? How are we going to get people to actually acknowledge what happened in the past? Right? I say to you, as has been said from the floor, posing it as a question of reparations to be paid off is an invitation to close the door in historical memory. It's an invitation.
How does that even compute? Okay, how can you say that reparations, having conversation on reparations, is going to close the door on the desire to educate people on, letting them not forget what happened? Oh my God. I never thought Loury was this bad. I never thought it was this bad. But consider the British slave owners who were compensated for their slaves. Reparations paid £20 million, approximately £16.5 billion in today's terms, which constitutes 40% of the British Treasury annual budget at the time. The mode of payment was direct payments to what? 3,000 slave-owning families, government annuities paying 3.5% interest. Economic impact. This massive capital transfer consolidated wealth among Britain's elite, financing industrial investments and reinforcing class structures. The payments were so substantial that the debt was only fully repaid in 2015. So up until 2015, people were still being paid reparations for owning slaves. Yet, the slaves themselves and the descendants of those slaves, you think it is an insult for them for you to consider reparations for them. I have no idea what's going on in the head of Professor Loury. I have absolutely no idea what's going on with him. But this is some bullshit. I'll put it that way. This is some bullshit. You know what? You can't teach an old dog new tricks. But what really gets me is I don't understand how people at this age in their life they have not been able to understand certain things. You just have one position on your life. With new information, you're unable to change. My God. Anyway, that's all for today. That's what I wanted to cover. Thanks for those that stayed. And Luke Bovine, I've been seeing your chats. Good one. Thanks for always coming to the stream. Like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the live stream. It's bye for now. White wine.